welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain, and we look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are moving on from the 19th century to the very beginning of the 20th. I thought it might be fun to continue to look at the Ladies' Home Journal. I'm actually really enjoying the articles in there. But this time I want to move on to January of 1901. And this article is called "The Baltimore Belle Who Made the Most Brilliant Match of Any Girl in America," being the fourth part of a story of beautiful women. By William Perrine? Anyways, so I'm not sure if this is a true story or if this is a work of fiction. But it caught my eye because can you define what it means to make a good match? To have a good, marriage? So you're saying that they had the best marriage, or that she just married up the most? That's what I think they're saying. I just thought it would be fun to take a look and see what they thought at the time would make a quote-unquote good match, most brilliant match of any girl in America. So, let's find out. I don't know what the other ones were about. I haven't read the series because I wanted to start in 1901. So, the other ones were in 1900 as being before this. Anyways, let's take a look. Charles Carroll of Carrollton, in the land from which his grandfather fled in terror, his granddaughter now reigns a queen. I don't understand that sentence. The land from which his grandfather fled in terror, his granddaughter now reigns a queen. Okay, such was the joyous toast which Bishop England proposed at a banquet in South Carolina on the 4th of July, 1827, when the Venerable Carroll, whose Irish ancestors had settled in Maryland in the days of the English Revolution, had become the only surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, I thought they meant a literal queen. Okay, that's why I was so confused. Okay, so his granddaughter now reigns a queen, so she's like, they did mention that she was a quote-unquote belle, Southern belle, I guess. Baltimore is not Southern, I don't know, but they said this was in South Carolina. Alright, it was then that Americans were reading with wondering eyes the stories which came from Ireland of the regal magnificence with which one of their countrywomen was dazzling the British people, how she had become the wife of the brother of the foremost of British soldiers, and how the court of the newly wedded pair at Dublin Castle rivaled the brilliancy of royalty itself. She was called the American Queen of the Irish Court. And in no capital of Europe would her flatterers allow that there was a woman who surpassed her in the elegance of her bearing and in the accomplishments of a sovereign. Indeed, she was only one of a group of sisters who Europeans hailed as the American Graces. Their mother, a daughter of Charles Carroll, had married Richard Caton, I don't know, a poor English gentleman of handsome face and presence, who became a merchant after his arrival in the country. She herself bore the reputation of being one of the most attractive women of her day, and the graceful figure, the comely neck, the profusion of hair, the bright eyes, and the winsome smile which are shown in her portrait amply bear witness to her womanly charms. Indeed, to her might not unfittingly be applied Macaulay's famous description of Saint Cecilia, a beautiful mother of a beautiful race. Her brother, too, had married a well-known beauty, Harriet Chew, a sister of two of the belles of Miss Chianza? Okay. Mischianza, I have no idea. And of the Caton girls, it was said, as Joseph Shippen wrote of their aunts, "With either Chew such beauties dwell, such charms with each are shared, no critic's judging eye can tell which merits most regard. 'Tis far beyond the painter's skill to set their charms to view, as far beyond the poet's quill to give the praise that's due." Famous of the four girls was Marianne, or Mary, who at the age of 18 was married in Baltimore to Robert Patterson, brother of Betsy Patterson, the first wife of Jerome Bonaparte. When the couple went to England together with Elizabeth and Louisa Caton, They created a profound impression on London society at a time when it was dominated by the Prince Regent, and when the Duke of Wellington was in the height and flush of his military glory. In the English court, Mrs. Patterson attracted the admiring eye of the prince himself, who marveled at her as an American beauty. She easily adapted herself to English manners and customs, as her sisters also did, and in no time she became a conspicuous figure among the choicest women of England. The victor of Waterloo, who time and again complimented her as an ornament of her sex, proudly lavished upon her all the honor which hospitality could suggest. Hardly less eminent than the Duke before the Battle of Waterloo had been his brother, the Marquis of Wellesley, with whom Mrs. Patterson, after the death of her husband in Baltimore in 1822 and her return to England, was soon destined to attract the gaze of Europe. Wellesley at this time was 63 years old and a widower. He had sat in Parliament, had been Governor-General of India, had put down Indian rebellions, and had exhibited in high degree the qualities of a successful ruler as well as of a military chieftain. In the spring of 1825 it was announced in Ireland, where Wellesley was Lord Lieutenant, that he was engaged to her, and it was noted in the United States as a curious coincidence that while one American girl had married the brother of Napoleon, another, and she, her sister-in-law, should marry the brother of Napoleon's conqueror. She has made, said Madame Bonaparte, in a half-envious, half-querulous letter at this time, the greatest match any woman ever made. And I suppose now that people will see Mrs. Caton was right in starving herself to keep her daughters in Europe. What? The Marquis of Wellesley is 65. He married an Italian singer by whom he had a family of children. She is dead. He has no fortune. On the contrary, he is over head and ears in debt. His salary is £30,000 per annum as Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. He will be there 18 months longer, and if the king does not give him another place, he is entitled as a poor nobleman to at least £10,000 a year. The Catons, I suppose, will be quite enchanted with the match, for it gives them a rank in Europe, and with Mr. Carroll's money to maintain it properly, they may indeed be considered the most fortunate people in the United States. And I suppose now that people will see Mrs. Caton was right in starving herself to keep her daughters in Europe. Okay, I have a lot of issues with this. I'm going to try not to say anything until we can finish the article. So, keeping my opinion to myself, this is a rather long article. Just really quickly, I think I'm just going to look it up. All right, so the Marquis of Wellesley, or first Marquess Wellesley, Richard Wellesley, was born in 1760 and died in 1842. So in 1822, he was still alive and was in his 60s. So he wasn't 65, he was 62, but it doesn't matter because that's pretty dang close, okay? So that is an actual person, Richard Wellesley. All right, that was the first person I looked up. What about Richard Caton? Let's try that. Also a real person. Okay, I'm going to have to take this all back. It looks like this was a true story. Robert Patterson, also a real person. Oh, jeez, I'm going to have to completely take back everything. Who the heck is Harriet Chew? Harriet Chew Carroll, Benjamin Chew's daughter. Oh my gosh. Okay, I take it all back. This is a true story. Wow. Okay, I apologize for misleading you and assuming that this was false. All right. Well, in that case, I'm actually more interested in it. I don't appreciate them moral judgment on people's choices, especially if they're choosing to starve themselves. Not funny. It's not funny. Anyways, but I will continue reading the rest of the article. I think that is really interesting information to know that these are about real people, and I don't know how accurate the story is, but it's at least based on a true story, if not completely accurate. So let's continue. The bride bore herself like a queen. At this time we have a curious glimpse in Dublin of the once opulent Harman Blennerhassett, Hassett, the unfortunate victim of the Aaron Burr conspiracy nearly 20 years before. After tasting the bitterness of poverty, he had gone back to Ireland to establish, if possible, a claim to an estate. In marriage of Mrs. Patterson to the Marquis, he thought that he saw an opportunity of gaining a place in the civil service in Ireland. In urging his suit, he pointed out that he had some ties of kinship with the Wellesley family, and then expressed his ardent wishes for the perfect happiness of the union resulting from your nuptials with a lady whose acquaintance Mrs. Blennerhassett made some years since at Baltimore. It was reported in the gossip of the day that while the Marquis himself had little money of his own, that he was probably in debt, his American wife would bring him not less than £150,000. But the people of the Irish capital insisted that it was after all a genuine love match and welcomed it with uncommon rejoicing. How can they know that? There were 2 ceremonies of marriage performed at Dublin Castle in uniting the pair. First came the Lord Primate of Ireland with the rites of the Church of England. Lord Primate, huh? But the bride was a Catholic, and accordingly a second service was performed by the Archbishop of Dublin on the same day. It was this double nuptial that gave not a little concern to the politicians of the time. The Orange faction were in great alarm lest the Viceroy might find himself placed in leading strings by the American beauty, and the influence which she might wield over him was a subject which occupied the attention of such leaders of the Irish people as Shiel and Daniel O'Connell. The bride was only 31 years old, she was in the full bloom of her beauty, and it was generally agreed that no peeress to the manor born could have given more proof of the ease and grace of a woman fit to rule. Famous ball for the American beauty. The fame of the American Vice Queen is perpetuated in Shiel's story of the famous tabinet or tabaret ball that was given at the Rotunda in Dublin not long after the marriage. The fete had been suggested as a popular expedient for helping to relieve the poor and starving of the nation. The name given to it described a watered fabric of silk, warp, and wool filling, and peremptory orders were issued that no one should appear at the castle in a dress that was not of Irish manufacture. Long in advance, all the milliners and dressmakers of Dublin were overrun by Irish belles. Crowds of families flocked in the capital from the surrounding country, and on the morning of the great day the streets were blocked with carriages, hurrying from all quarters, and were filled with women anxious to look upon the fair American. Their countrymen insisted that their tabinet attire set off still more than their ordinary costumes on such occasions the loveliness of their aspect as they stood in the rotunda waiting for the Marquis and his wife. A Yankee Vice Queen was said. Such a thing had never before been witnessed in the history of the Irish people. When Wellesley entered to the music of the royal anthem with his Marchioness leaning upon his arm, they were greeted with acclamations. The Lord Lieutenant was small in stature, but he was conscious that he was representing his sovereign at London, and the flattering courtiers thought he was as majestic as if he stood 6 feet high, with his searching and finely irradiant eyes and his furrowed cheeks, and wearing a uniform profusely decorated with orders. In spite of his years, he retained enough of the handsome and engaging manhood of his early days to impress the spectator as they gazed upon his coat with its insignia, his white pantaloons, and his short boots with tassels of gold, lent luster to the Dublin court. But all eyes were turned in a moment upon the bride, for there seems to have been a peculiar curiosity to note how an American woman on such an occasion would deport herself. It was remarked at once that she executed her curtsies with unusual grace, and that she had nothing of la bourgeoise parvenue. So that means like the previously known, like, simple people. She was dressed in simple white tabinet crossed with a garland of flowers. Her figure was elegantly proportioned, her features finely regular in the perfection of composure and dignity. The Irish eyewitness, in describing her, said that her arms and shoulders, though less suited to Hebe than to Pomona, were finely molded, and her waist delicately small and tapering. Her profile was marked and classical. Her complexion had not that purity and milkiness of color which belonged to Irish beauty, but it was perhaps not the less agreeable from having been touched by a warmer sun. Her brows were softly and straightly penciled, and an expression of permanent mildness sat upon the lips. I love that they said her brows were penciled. Like, We're using makeup these days, yeah? With measured and stately tread, the viceroyal pair advanced to a throne surmounted by a canopy of scarlet and gold at the extreme end of the reception hall. When they had seated themselves, their suite formed a hollow square around them to keep off the spectators from too close an approach, and the ceremonies of reception were begun. Such was the homage paid to the lovely American that she was compared to the celebrated Miss Ambrose of last century, who had occupied the throne of beauty at the court of Lord Chesterfield. Even the court of George IV at England, without a queen, was regarded as being less brilliant than the court at Dublin Castle when it was under the rule of the Wellesleys. The triumph of Mary Caton was indeed complete. I'm going to see if I can find a picture of this woman, because I'm interested to see what she actually looks like. They're making a big deal about her way she looks. I wish they would say a little more about what she thinks. I'm just saying. All right. The husbands of the other two Graces. Nor was Louisa Caton, the youngest of the three Graces, hardly less successful in winning the admiration of the British nobility. Nearly 8 years before, she had married a distinguished soldier, Colonel Sir Felton Bathurst Hervey, who had been an aide-de-camp under Wellington at Waterloo, and who had lost his right arm at the Battle of Vittoria. Between 1820 and 1830, it became fashion to compare the trio of sisters to the former historic British beauties, the Duchess of Rutland, the Duchess of Gordon, and the Duchess of Devonshire. Of the oldest of the Americans, Scheele, in his exuberance, said that if he were called upon to point out among the portraitures of fictitious life an illustration of the Marchioness of Wellesley, I do not think that with reference to her air, her manners, the polish and placidity of her expression, I could select any more appropriate than the English heroine of Don Juan, the Lady Adeline Amundeville. It was with much of the same spirit of admiration in the court of George IV that the charms of Lady Hervey were viewed by English noblemen, among whom she was to make a still more notable match. Louisa's husband died 2 years after their marriage, but when she was 37 years old, she was again married. The bridegroom was 7 years her junior, was one of the handsomest men in England, and on the death of his father in 1838 succeeded to the title of the Duke of Leeds. Elizabeth, the second of the sisters, was married in 1836 to Baron Stafford, whose family was one of the most ancient in England. There was also a fourth sister at home, who married John McTavish, a Scotchman who was Canadian consul at Baltimore. It was no wonder that Madame Bonaparte, when she heard how Louisa had carried off the heir of the Duke of Leeds, was moved to exclaim to the Catons, "I think they are the most fortunate people I ever heard or read of." That's more than fortunate, you know. I mean, you have to have connections. You have to really play the part. I mean, that's more than fortunate. That's more than just, wow, they were really lucky. Although luck does play a part in it. But you have to work for something like that. Like, you don't get attached and, like, marry royalty by doing nothing, by just hanging out. And it doesn't happen. There is a certain amount of luck, but you also have to try. You have to work at it. You have to be in places where they might be. You know, I mean, you have to try. Anyways, the Catons in the old society of Baltimore. Both the father and the mother of these brilliant women lived long enough to behold all their foreign triumphs, and the gallant Philip Hone, once mayor of New York, has recorded in his diary a little scene which he witnessed in 1840 on a visit to Baltimore, and which also illustrates in its best estate the old-time social life of that city. In the evening, he wrote, I went to a musical party at General Harper's, where I found a great number of very agreeable people. I certainly think there are more handsome young married women and girls in Baltimore than in any circle of society of the same size I have ever known. But you never see them except at a party of this kind, for they are not seen much in the streets, nor have they a broad way to walk in. I had the pleasure to meet Mrs. Caton and her sister Mrs. Harper, from whom I received a most friendly recognition. I called upon her yesterday, and received a very particular message that she was lying down, but that I must certainly call again. She is old, not ugly, infirm, but exceedingly gracious in her manners, and nearly blind, but lively and quick of apprehension. She was unquestionably, as I told her, the belle of the evening. Every gentleman on entering made her a bow, which she returned with much grace, after inquiring his name, for she finds it difficult to recognize her most intimate friends except by voice. and every lady took her hand in parting. How much of this arises from the circumstances of her being the mother of a duchess, a marchioness, and a countess, it might be difficult to ascertain. But I am certain that if she were as haughty and disagreeable as she is affable and ladylike, this homage would not be paid with that willing frankness which I witnessed this evening. You ought to be happy, madame, said I, to find yourself so beloved. Indeed I am, sir, she replied. You can have no idea how happy it makes me. We had fine music. Several of the ladies sang. If we had such parties in New York, I would attend more frequently. When the courtly James Buchanan went to London as American minister in 1853, to be summoned back 3 years later to the presidency, he frequently met with the Marchioness of Wellesley and her sister Lady Stafford. These 3 American girls, he said, speaking also of the Duchess of Leeds, who was in Scotland, have had a strange fate. Many of their sex have envied them, but I think without cause. They are all childless, and would, I verily believe, have been more happy had they been united to independent gentlemen in their own country. Ooh, that's the tea. He dined with 2 of them in the historic place at Hampton Court, and he wrote home to his accomplished niece, Miss Harriet Lane, who herself was soon to grace the White House as it had never before been by a young woman, about some of the impressions he had formed. The Lady Wellesley, it seems, had bowed down by dropsical disease. Okay, dropsy was a disease that they called a disease, but it's not a disease, it's more of a symptom. It means swelling all over the body, edema. So it's caused by water retention, which could be from kidney disease or heart disease or liver problems, or, there are a couple different causes, but if somebody has dropsy, then they are very uncomfortable all the time, and they look puffy, in fact. So that's not so fun. All right, the Lady Wellesley, it seems, was bowed down by dropsical disease, but she retained traces of her former beauty. The Lady Stafford, whom he recalled as the belle of belles in her day, in America, had become gross, and all of her good looks were gone except a cheerful and animated countenance. But she was a fine woman and very much a Catholic devotee, and both the widows declared the venerable statesman loved to talk about America and appeared still to be possessed of genuine American hearts. That's not very kind. Now, is it? That was 1853? So, they're what, in their 50s, 60s? So they're saying, like, now that they're in their 60s, they're not pretty anymore? I'm kind of salty about that. All right. Wow. Okay, that was so much more than I was expecting. Okay, first of all, calling this article the Baltimore Belle who made the most brilliant match of any girl in America. Okay, I'm going to go back to, what was her name? I think they only mentioned it like once. So I'm going to have to look up Caton, Elizabeth Caton. I don't feel like that was a brilliant match. I don't understand why people thought that at the time. So what did she have going for her? She was rich and she was gorgeous. Rich and gorgeous, you can basically have anyone you want. I mean, not quite anyone, but like any kind of a person you want. And yet she decided to marry an English nobleman who was Lord of Ireland, who was broke. And you're calling that the most brilliant match of any girl in America. I take exception to that. I don't like that they called her that. It does have a picture in it. I will include it. It's a little bit dark and it's a little hard to see properly. But it does describe that scene where they enter. But she's so visibly much younger than him. Like, she was, 30 when they got married, and he was 62. Ugh. Like, I don't know. I don't really like that. Lady Stafford. And it's a stock photo. I am going to take it anyway because there's a watermark on it. We will live through it. I mean, I don't know, like, if I'm going to be picky about how she looks, like she was a famed beauty, But as I look at her, she has kind of a weak chin, a little bit of a pointy nose. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure she was a very lovely person and had a great poise about her. However, I don't feel like it's very fair to, like, call her this really amazing beauty if she wasn't really. All right, Marianne Wellesley, Marchioness Wellesley. So it was Marianne, not Elizabeth. My bad. Here. Now this is the picture that is in the article. So I'm not going to take it from here because I'm going to take it from the article. But apparently that's a famous painting. It's a very oval, soft face. But that might have just been the interpretation. Here's Richard Wellesley. Well, he looked very intelligent. Like, he has this sharpness in his eyes. I can't describe, but hopefully that's what attracted her to him. Like, attentiveness. This is a very, like, attentive person. I like this picture. It shows her face from several angles, and that helps you see, like, why people thought she was so beautiful. Looks like there's a book called Sisters of Fortune about these sisters. Is that Marianne on the front? Yeah, I think it is. Alright, so my thoughts on this are, I feel like this was hyped up a little too much. That saying that this woman made, like, the best match of the century because she married a man who had a title, where she was the one providing all the money. I don't think that's fair. I also don't think it's fair to say, like, that they were very, very fortunate. Dude, their father was super rich. Like, if he weren't, then they wouldn't have been able to do all the things that they did. I don't think that she married badly, if that's what makes her happy, but it feels a little bit like she sold herself into marriage for the title. Because if, you know, it's the typical, like, gold digger idea, except in this case she was the one who was rich. So it wasn't for the money that she married him, it was for the title that he had and basically becoming royalty in Europe. And that's what she wanted. So if that's what you want, that's fine. But I don't think I would ever say, oh, she married so well. Did she, though? No, that's all I'm saying. Like, did she really marry that well? Or was she happy in that position? Because that's not clear to me. So, I'm not sure. And I don't know if I have an answer here. I'm still gathering some pictures that I want to show you. It's just frustrating to me that in this society, even at this time, they would look at a couple from the outside and say, look how well they married. It's like if you want to talk about somebody marrying well, I would say Meghan Markle married well. You know what I mean? Like she married royalty and she seems so incredibly happy with Harry. So I would say that she married well. Whereas somebody like this, I don't know if she's very happy. I can't tell. She might just be very good at putting on the fashion and showing up and looking pretty. You know, she seems to be a very good hostess. Well, that requires a certain amount of acting ability. So I don't know how happy she was. It never even really mentions that. Was she a happy person? Was she happy in her position? Did she get what she wanted out of life? Because there's this very unfortunate tendency of the world to judge from the outside and say, oh, that person did well with their life. Where if they are very miserable, then they didn't do well with their life, did they? If they were unhappy all their life, then they didn't do well. And I think that that's something we need to normalize. That even if you have a situation that looks good from the outside, you might not be happy. You might not be satisfied with your life. So anyway, this video is going on super long. I'm going to cut out a whole bunch of my ramblingness. But that's the main point that I wanted to point out, is just that because things look good from the outside doesn't mean they're actually good. And I don't know how well Marianne Wellesley married, considering that she didn't seem to have that much in common with her husband. That's all I'm saying. I don't know for sure. Maybe she was happy. I hope she was. For her sake, I sincerely hope that she was happy. But I can't tell based on the information I have. I can look at that and say, oh, well, she seemed happy, but I can't say that she was happy. Anyway, that's my rant of the day, and I hope you enjoyed the Microfiche time capsule. I found that really fascinating, and I learned about a whole group of, people that I knew nothing about before. So I learned something today. I hope you did too. By the way, there is a lovely book on these sisters called The Sisters of Fortune by Jihan Wake. So if you're interested in that, I will just plug that book. This is not sponsored. I just stumbled across the book and now I want to read it. So I just thought I'd point it out to everyone. So if you liked this video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.